But I'm really looking for some freedom here as well to use my own artistic style and start to let the painting speak for itself. Something that has changed powerfully for me over the past few years of watercolor is that I've started to feel like watercolor is my playground. And, there was a time when watercolor was my taskmaster. I wanted to learn technique and I wanted to be able to control the medium. And that felt like a lot of work. And the bright light around the corner is that when watercolor starts to become something you've spent a lot of time with, when your art medium grows familiar to you, it starts to feel a little more like a playground. And that's really an exciting feeling, to feel like what you have in front of you is something you can relax into. You can explore and experiment, and you can get a little bit playful and silly and just have that kind of relaxed vibe that lets you enjoy what you have. I don't think it should be reserved for artists who have spent decades painting. I think this should be a mindset, an attitude, and an approach we take from the very beginning of your art journey. In play, we expand our boundaries. We look for unexpected ways to use our tools and our materials. And we we're willing to break rules and see how far we can take something. And so one thing I've done in my studio is I surround myself with yeses, with little cues that I get to make choices. I get to have fun. And there's no risk to me in that process. There's only kind of freedom, new exploration, and exciting outcomes. That's really what this painting session is all about. I'm playing in a new area of design. I'm growing as an artist in the process, and my voice gets to shine through. I want to encourage you to follow along and then try something similar in your own artistic practice. I had a fun idea I want to try, and that is challenging myself to create paintings inspired by graphic design. I was just walking through my studio and I saw this magazine cover from last year's back issue of What Women Create. Just out of the corner of my eye, what I saw here was the little rounded shapes of these chair backs. And I thought, wouldn't it be fun to just design some kind of sketchy painting based on this kind of layout? Just letting it be my jumping off point. I think most of us, we see the blank page and we get a little bit paralyzed. We want to create something and we want it to be good, but we don't always know where to start. And having a little prompt, especially if you want to paint kind of abstractly, is a really good place to do that. There's a challenge here. I don't want to be literal and I want to be playful with it. But let's look at a couple of other things about this design. One thing I notice is the shadows of the chairs and the light. It's actually very washed out in terms of the background. We just have this big white space. The photographer has really kind of pushed those backlighting contrasts so that we would just focus on this shape here. We have a very strong horizontal shape, and then we have the shadows cast by the chairs. I could decide as well whether I want to use the colors that are here, as well as the text or the typography, if I want to incorporate that into my design. What I really like as well, there's some warmth here and some coolness. The shadows feel very cool. Even the background, the white there, feels kind of cool to me because there's not any sunlit warm yellows or anything coming through. The warmth of this image is really popping through in this kind of the reds and the pinks and the coral in this area. And then a few of these chairs are picked out with some cooler colors again. And so there's this really great placement here that this photographer has used. And so I want to let that be my inspiration as I create something on my blank paper and be kind of fresh and loose with it and, see where we end up. So I'm going to start with just creating a background, an underpainting as it were. And I'm a real underpainting fan because it gives you a little bit of room to build your painting around. It gives you kind of a soft beginning most of the time. I'm looking at those shadows there. And so I'm going to create like a lower half of the scene. And I guess I'm working vertically. I hadn't really decided actually. And so now I'm seeing that, yeah, we're vertical here. So we're going to keep that in mind. I've got some kind of blocky shapes because the chairs are kind of breaking up the shadows that are here. And I don't want to be too rigid with that because this is an underpainting, so I want a lot of softness. So even though I'm positioning these early shapes as crisp, kind of chunky shapes with my flat brush, the next thing I'm going to do is just start to create some softness. And I like using a spray bottle for that and making room for the paint to flow. Once I start incorporating flow into my painting, I also like to incorporate some gravity and get some of that excess moisture flowing down off the page. Let's drop in a little bit of additional color. There's some kind of violets here. They feel like violets to me, so I'm going to drop in a violet as well. And I'm working with kind of a little puddle that was already in my palette. I don't clean my palette so that I can have kind of these earthy kind of palette dirt colors that are always in my palette and can kind of form the beginning or the foundation for a new painting without me having to mix pigment fresh every single time. And it's a good way to work, because when you work with pre-mixed color that's dried in your palette from a previous painting session, what ends up happening is you get some continuity in your colors from one painting to the next. It can really help it look like you have a cohesive style, even if you're not sure what your style is. So now I've got my underpainting, basically my background and the shadows in the foreground. I do want to see some light dancing across the shapes of my chairs. I'm not going to paint chairs looking at those shapes, and we're going to abstract that. But I want to make sure I've got room for them. So I'm just going to lift out a little bit of pigment here while it's still damp. Drag through there. I do kind of like having this shape coming up through the painting, so I'm going to leave that little to break up that shape. From here, I can decide either I want to let this dry or I want to keep working. And because I want to kind of work with some freshness and immediacy, I'm actually going to keep going, let this dry while I develop the next layer. And so I've grabbed a pencil here. This is a 4B sketching pencil, and I like the big flat lead because it gives me the chance to make wider marks. And we're just going to find some shapes that reflect kind of an abstraction of what we see in our reference photo. And like I said, I was struck by the rounded shapes of the kind of chair shapes, so I'm going to be working with those and really keeping a loose grip on my pencil and looking for just an interesting pattern of shapes that move across my scene. I really like the little heart that's there, so we're going to place maybe an interesting bright color in that spot. And I've put a lot of busy little marks in here. That's my prerogative. Just to have some playfulness in the scene. And I'm going to look for my reds right away. Why not? And immediately after placing those marks, I feel like they look timid to me. You know, wanting to paint abstractly, it means kind of faking your confidence and looking for indications when you start to feel kind of held back or restrained. We don't want that feeling when you're painting with intuition or abstraction. You really want to feel free. And at this stage as well, putting in those reds, recognizing the role they play in kind of tying my painting together, I want to place them with some confidence. I want to take ownership of that element of the scene, adding a little bit of yellow to this coral color so I can place some kind of peachy color in here as well. And I'm also wanting to have a little bit of freedom to maybe start thinking about taking new directions as I start to kind of own this scene. This is my painting now, loosely inspired by the layout, the arrangement of shapes on this magazine cover. And so at this point, the artist's choices need to start taking center stage, being the first priority. For me, that means looking for cues, loving that pop of red and the ability to place that into the scene. But I'm really looking for some freedom here as well to use my own artistic style and start to let the painting speak for itself. So I'm going to use the colors that are in the scene, but also start moving toward my own interpretation, developing this painting, this little sketch, in a way that feels fun and playful and true to who I am.
Join the Heart-Led Artist Journey for monthly lessons that will help you develop your own heart-prioritizing artistic style.
I like this little color that I just mixed. It's a couple of different turquoises in my palette. I also have areas of the paper that are still dry, so any marks I make over here are going to be quite crisp. And you can see how they kind of stay where they've been placed on that dry paper. And I like the little feeling of those little dancing marks. I'm going to put a few over here as well, just to kind of create some unity across the page. And this is where I start making my own decisions and taking ownership of this. And this is where this might go away so that I can pay attention to what's happening here on the page. I want to bring in some darks, a little bit more weight in the scene. I like the darks placed by my pencil, and I could kind of work with those. It's really fun to, once I've done some painting, sketching with my brush, to do a little bit of sketching with my pencil, and letting the pencil kind of follow or trace around some of the shapes I've painted can be really a good way of kind of reinforcing what's already on the page. Again, working decisively makes your painting stronger. It's really hard to feel confident of your choices when you don't know how the painting's going to turn out. So we really kind of do have to fake it. So I placed a line of kind of this pale orange over here using a water-soluble crayon. I'm going to echo that over in some other parts of the page. And I also feel like there's a part of me that's being very timid about this upper part of the painting. And this is where I want to start thinking about looking for ways to create some interest up here. Now, in my reference photo, in the prompt that we used, we did have the typography. I'm not going to be using typography for my design, so I have to think about other ways of making the design kind of come together and filling this upper, not necessarily filling the upper part of the page, but just making sure that the upper part of the painting fits with the rest of the scene, supports it well. So I just put in a little diluted wash of that same coral color, just in this corner here, diluted it, letting it run. It's actually coming right down to touch this area here. I could do the exact same thing in this corner, but I don't really want to. I'm just going to put a little blob of that coral color and then actually dilute it going up this time. So it's a little bit darker at the bottom and a little more transparent at the top. So those are a couple of strategies. Using the crayon, I can, just like I did with my pencil, I can trace around some of my shapes again. I love reinforcing something I've already drawn rather than thinking of a brand new idea. It's just kind of fun to go, there's a shape here, I'm just going to reiterate it. And there's a shape here, I'm going to reiterate that. I'm going to reiterate that shape over there. Got a little bunch of little marks here. Let's make some more little marks. So, you don't have to just have constant new ideas when you're painting. Take one or two things and just belabor those points. It's really kind of fun to see how that can make your painting come together. I like that turquoise there. Placed a little bit more of it there. Not quite the same turquoise, but it's close. Maybe a little line of it there. Maybe a little line of it there. So I've got this dance of those colors and shapes. I can even put it up here. So again, not inventing new things, just kind of taking what's already there and moving around the painting with those ideas. So we know these are chairs. Other people might not see that when they look at this, and that's fine by me. I don't need that kind of reinforcement of everyone needing to understand what I'm painting. This is an abstract exercise. And the interesting thing about an abstract exercise is when you are painting something and you know what it is, it's very, very hard to abstract it. Our brains want to just steer it over into something you can interpret.
And so I know that about my brain. I know that about myself. I don't know what to do with that information today. It's just information. And so we're going to leave it at that. I'm thinking about reinforcing some of these shadow shapes. And instantly that literal part of me says, got to paint around the chair legs. So I instantly find myself feeling like I'm limited into what I can do. Just really interesting to notice that. Instead of thinking that way, let's think about these dark shadow shapes as connecting lines that move us across the painting. And so then I have to look at how they connect with each other. I've made them quite crisp, a little bit gauging how my paper is drying. And so placing some crisp marks helps me to see how wet my paper is, how much the color is going to flow. And then I can decide if I want to kind of open those shapes up. That's what I usually call it, by adding a little bit of water. I can soften with a damp brush too. But I actually like using a spray bottle a little bit more because it doesn't press against the pigment and it doesn't drag through the pigment. It just mists it and loosens the surface of the pigment. I can use a brush to change up or adjust some of these shapes, and that's where, dragging through pigment, you can see that happening. The brush can also be used as a sponge to lift color or reduce moisture on the page. So up here, I can soften that shape and let that edge move towards this side of the page, or I can drag through it and bring some of that pigment up and around, kind of creating a little bit more continuation of those lines. And then while this is damp, I can look at some of the other colors in my painting and think about whether or not I want to bring some of those back in. For example, this kind of lavender and turquoise combination, which gives me this soft sky blue. It's a little bit opaque, so I can touch in some of those colors, and they kind of want to look like a lighter value color. They don't disappear into the dark hues on the page. And that's one of my favorite things about opaque colors in my paintings. A little bit of line there, why not? And a little bit there, just kind of reiterating. Like I said, what I like is to do, see something I like and do a little bit more of it. And it's interesting because the longer you paint, the more the dynamic things that you did at the beginning, the things that felt like they were dominating the painting, they can start to disappear. Those reds that I've placed don't look as kind of put your eye out red as they did when I started. And so I might decide that I need to bring a little bit of red back into the scene. It's a transparent red, this quinacridone coral. And so it often seems like it almost pales in comparison to the brighter or more opaque colors, which are going to feel a little heavier on the paper. And so at this point, I can maybe do another wash of color over top of some of my reds, or I can use a little bit of line to kind of reinforce some of those reds. I have some different options to help bring kind of that vibrance of the red back into the scene. And it's not quite the same red, but I've got this brilliant orange crayon, so I could bring some of that into the painting as well. I find with these crayons, they don't look super bright, but then if I moisten them with a little bit of spray, a little bit of water, then they tend to get some of that vibrance, as well as kind of loosening some of those lines, and they kind of get a little bit of flow going on as well. Oh, that looks really cool. That little pop of red down in my shadow area. I kind of like the way that looks as well. So let's follow some of these lines with our beautiful quin coral. And I'm winding down here. I actually want to stop in just a minute. The only thing I'm thinking is I do feel like I still want something more in the upper part of the painting. Because this is an abstraction of, an image, this is not about the chairs. This is all about design and thinking about how we serve the painting best as this design evolves. And so I'm going to actually take that shadow color, which is my Moon Glow here. Make sure my brush is clean. And then we're going to pick up some of that Moon Glow and just bring it up through the upper part of the painting. And that's going to take our composition and just give us a strong dominant dark. I've placed it as a crisp dark shape. We're going to actually then dilute it, get some flow going on. Let it move right off to the edge of the page. And then I'm just going to, again, continuing to look at how my shapes kind of speak to each other, what elements stand out and what's connected. That's a big part of abstract painting, is looking for connections, getting excited about different things that seem exciting. And you know, when I put that little spatter of Queen Coral, I don't very often spatter red on my painting because red can look very violent. And so it's fun when you see something that ordinarily you wouldn't choose independently, chasing that a little bit. I've actually come to the point where there's very little purely dry white space in the painting. There's some here, and a little bit over here. I kind of wish there was a pop of dry white space right there, but there isn't, and so we work with what we have. I am going to just blot a little streak there. Maybe it'll do something. You never get back to pure white in watercolor very well. It's going to have that little bit of fussed over look. But I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. It's been fun to kind of try this experiment, this question of, can I take a design and make it something that's compelling on a piece of watercolor paper, something that has its own kind of energy, and solve a design problem, and really thinking about it as a design problem, because I want to become better at designing my paintings, thinking about the interplay, the connection, the relationship of shapes and colors and values. And that is really what design is about. So giving myself a game, an assignment of taking something like a magazine cover, turning it into a design that I can explore and think about those different shapes and patterns. Using someone else's design means that I get to take some of their knowledge. I get to think about their decision-making process. Why did they do what they do? What's going on that makes this a compelling design? And then by exploring that, you know, my own ability to make intentional and well thought out and instinctive design decisions becomes stronger. And that's exciting to see. One thing I love to do as I wrap up any little painting is, especially when I'm abstracting, is to turn it and look at it from different directions. Sometimes it's amazing to see what that will bring in terms of, you know, you'll see something in the painting, or you'll see the design in a new way. And it's just a good way of seeing how the design works from all different angles.